Hi, I'm Mike Lowe I'm the Executive Director of Coventure, and I'm here with Lisa Raleigh, who's our expert in nonprofit development, specifically in the fundraising side. And we're grateful to have Lisa with us again to kind of talk about mature nonprofits. We've already talked about those early stage nonprofits who are launching, and we've talked about those kind of middle of the road nonprofits that are scaling and are perhaps launching new products or services that need special attention, and what does that look like? And so now we're going to turn our attention to that mature nonprofit who still has to weather the storms and still has to be considerate of a number of different elements, from macroeconomic forces to just internal operational challenges. And so Lisa, I'd like to, again, give you a brief introduction, and then without further ado, jump right in. But again, Lisa comes to us with tremendous experience from both the public and private sector, having been a big part of two anchor businesses in the Valley, Big Stone Publishing and Backbone Media, which she was a founder of. And her 9 years of work with Colorado Mountains School as the head of development. And then of course, in the last year, she spent a lot of time working with local nonprofits, mostly mature nonprofits, and getting their kind of dotting their I's, crossing their T's, and making sure that they're doing everything they can to ensure sustainability. And maybe in some ways that's the theme here, is what does sustainability look like for that mature nonprofit? So on that note, Lisa, let's jump in and talk about what that looks like. And I should maybe also say, with this particular show, we've opted not to have special guests. There's really kind of a lot of things to sort of understand. So this really is just a conversation with Lisa and myself. So Lisa, go right ahead.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. I love doing this with you. We're having a lot of conversations, and it's been awesome. So I've spent the past year working with nonprofits. All of them were $1 million and under. So let's just use that for context. These are going to be smaller to mid-sized nonprofits in the Valley. And I think to a T, every one of them brought me in because they really wanted to make sure they were maximizing their development potential. So even if you've been around for a while, you still probably have a lot more opportunity. And for many executive directors, if they're also the fundraising champion, they didn't necessarily get into this line of work for the fundraising piece. They got in because of their absolute love of program. And so I think it's been really helpful for them to have someone on their team kind of guide and direct and champion them on the fundraising side, because it's an uncomfortable space for a lot of people to think about asking for money, but it's the absolute lifeblood of any nonprofit.
And I think there's an assumption is like, okay, you're an established nonprofit. You've been serving a community of people for years, maybe decades. You've got annual givers. You've got your relationships. We talked a lot about last issue of like the art of developing those relationships that inspire donors to be involved year after year. But there's so many different pieces of that puzzle. And I wonder if you could kind of help us understand, like, what does that ideal nonprofit look for? Like if you are a mature nonprofit, is there a model that you're striving to be? Could you walk us through that model?
Yeah, you bet. I think the first distinguishing factor I often think about is a lot of nonprofits don't have a development staff. If you're fortunate enough, like my time at CRMS, we actually had a development team, and I led that team. So we had a whole group of people working in that space, and it was our job every single day to fundraise, and we got pretty skilled and pretty successful at that. But the majority of nonprofits I'm talking about here today, and the ones that I've been working with, they either have the executive directors, the EDs are tasked with fundraising, or they have maybe a solo director of development. And so there is so many things on these folks' plates that they get pulled in 100 different directions. And program always is, the first place they're going to want to go. And so I come in and I say, listen, development has to be a staked out, intentional space. And you got to wake up every single morning with a mindset of how am I going to move my organization forward financially? And what I realized just in this bigger question that you're asking, part of it has to do with my personal background. I actually have a PhD in environmental science, and I'm a hydrologist in my former life. But then out of necessity, marrying my husband, moving to Colorado, I ended up in this, you spoke to this PR and associate publisher space, and then ultimately in development. And so I have a pretty unique perspective, but I think it's served me well. And that's what I've been sharing with all of my clients is the way I see development, even if you're established, even if you have participation donors, major donors, special event money, grant money, odds are, unless you've been paying really close attention to development and working it every single day, you are probably leaving a lot of money on the table for your organization and for the clients you serve. And so for me, it comes down to two spheres, and I've done presentations on this here in the Valley and to the Devo group, but there is a very mathematical, analytical side of development. You simply must know your math, and you must have a clear map to your money. And oftentimes when I work with nonprofits, they haven't quite done that work. So stage one is, what is your math? How much money did you raise last year, and how is that broken out, and what are the components, and where does major giving fall, and do you have leadership giving, and what does that look like? And then the second part of this puzzle or Venn diagram is the absolute art of philanthropy. And that includes being so comfortable advocating for your organization and asking for money and loving that opportunity and taking incredibly good care of your donors. And for folks, and there's a lot of practice in both those things, but when those two circles overlap, that is the sweet spot in the middle. And for people that can operate from that space, they will see tremendous success above and beyond what they've historically been doing.
So, we've talked a lot about COVID-19 in these episodes and what that means for organizations. But I think whether it's COVID-19 or another issue, I think any organization, whether it's new or established, is going to deal with these macroeconomic forces, these events that are game changers. What specific advice do you have around that for an established, mature nonprofit dealing with crisis?
Yeah, COVID is probably going to go down as one of the most it's so disruptive, and it's impossible to understand it. And right away, unlike maybe the recession of 2008, which affected everybody pretty globally in the same way, COVID has introduced incredible challenges for a whole group of people and incredible opportunity for a whole other group. And so I think for those nonprofits that have greatly been impacted, because let's say they're in the arts community and they can't provide their services, they're not holding their theater or their courses, and they have a revenue component to their nonprofit that's being dramatically impacted. And it feels difficult to ask for money if you're not a frontline service, or you might, be uncomfortable in that space. On the flip side, you have some nonprofits that all of a sudden their essential services are more in demand than ever, and funding sources appeared out of nowhere. There's a bunch of COVID funds, both locally. We have some incredibly philanthropic people in our valley that have come together through the Aspen Community Foundation, all the other community foundations in the state, and even at the state level, there's all this new money. So I think it's been really, I don't know if I want to use the word unfair, but it just is almost the luck of the draw what type of services you provide as a nonprofit and how dramatically impacted you were, or the new opportunity that presented itself. That said, if you were economically impacted, I think you have to be super careful. If you go into austerity mode and shrink your budget, but also go into austerity mode with your donor asks, that is a very challenging place to come from a year or two from now, when you need to ramp back up to what's normal, and you weren't having those conversations with your donors and keeping them engaged, even though you're not a frontline organization.
We talk a lot about worst and best case scenarios with companies, just to make sure they have those bookends. Like, this is what we're looking at, and certainly there's the market opportunity that we're going to chase. And I want to talk about like market opportunity in the nonprofit space. But let's first talk about worst case scenario. You've done what you can, you've lost some donors, and I imagine this is a true scenario for a lot of mature nonprofits. They have lost donors, they've had to make some layoffs. If you have to make those choices, what are you cutting first? Like, what are you doing to not only salvage your organization, but make sure you don't lose that donor base?
I mean, I'm highly biased in this space, but what it reminds me of is, in 2008, the immediate thing most private sector companies did is they cut marketing and advertising, right? But then those who stay in that space aggressively, when the recession lifts, they've dominated, the market share. So the parallel for me is when the going gets tough, you want to keep development and fundraising a top priority, because otherwise to resurrect it is so challenging. Like, it's a proven fact in development that to keep an existing donor is significantly easier than to recruit a new donor or to bring back a lapsed donor. So all the clients I've been working with during COVID who've been negatively impacted, hugely encourage them to continue reaching out, particularly to their major donors, checking in, seeing how they're doing, but also sharing what the organization is doing and asking for those donors' continued support through this time. And it's awkward and it's hard, right? But I think donors for a nonprofit are the bread and butter of your organization, not program, because in these tough times, if you don't have donors and you can't get back to donors or funding, you won't even have a program. And that's kind of the hard, brutal part of what COVID, I think, is putting upon a lot of really good organizations.
What about market opportunity on the other spectrum? I think we always have to have that conversation, is if you move the fear out of the way, where is the new opportunity in the space? And how could you possibly catapult your organization to the next level because of the crisis? Can you speak to that a little bit? And maybe you even have some examples, even recent examples of how some of our nonprofits are actually thriving in this environment.
Yeah, I think that those organizations that really are comfortable in development, even in the time of crises, and put such a premium on their major supporters and major funders, and are incredibly comfortable staying engaged, sharing what's going on, and asking for what they need, have been hugely rewarded. I've got some friends in this space that do similar work to me, or maybe they're even on the front lines of asking as consultants. But those organizations that weren't obvious funding choices, they're not frontline COVID, but they just remained so engaged and so bold and fearless on behalf of their services, have been rewarded. And that's the danger of the austerity mindset. I get that you have to cut expenses to balance a budget, and I respect that and appreciate that. But I think you can't bring the austerity mindset to the donor relations and the donor asks. And you brought this up in the last session, and this whole idea of discovery conversations. This is so critically important. You want to know your donors so incredibly well. You want to be able to call them up after COVID initially starts its snowball over the hill. And you want to check in, you want to see how they're doing. You want to ask how they're personally being impacted. And you also want to let them know, hey, you're someone wicked important to our organization. Tell me how this is affecting your philanthropy. Tell me what you think about how you're moving forward. Because oftentimes, we tell ourselves stories that, oh gosh, this hit, no one's giving, I can't ask, that would be awful. Well, you don't know that, right? Right now, the stock market's incredibly strong. And so philanthropic people are still very generous. And I think you've got to be really careful that you don't tell yourself your own fearful story. And I'm guilty of this. So this is not a judgment call. It's human nature. But discovery lets you really find out where people are, what position they're in, and to say, listen, is it appropriate to ask for your ongoing support? You are simply cornerstone to our organization. And that's done in such a beautiful, respectful way, but knowledge is power. And in the absence of it, we tell ourselves incorrect stories most of the time.
There's such power in anecdotes, and I know we have to be careful mentioning names, but I would love to hear just some success stories from the nonprofits, the mature nonprofits you've worked with, like the things that they've done that have really set them apart or helped them realize some of these best practices in a meaningful way.
I think, it just comes down to, I do a lot of work with EDs who are also the fundraising person. And I've realized I've embraced the Brene Brown life coaching approach. You really can't do development well until you're super comfortable in your skin and you really recognize your role and your responsibility, and you get excited on behalf of your organization to ask for money. So I've had the great pleasure of working with a couple just extraordinary EDs who weren't necessarily loving that space before I met them, but after a month or two of work together, really having a paradigm shift on that and getting really excited about advocating for support for this program that they absolutely love and the people that they serve. And I think that's a huge part, is if anyone is watching this and they're an ED or in development and they don't love doing development work, that's where you want to go, because you want to figure that out. Because when you have that flip and that paradigm shift, all of a sudden it becomes joyous. And I think you and I have talked about it. Some of my greatest friendships were developed at CRMS in a development capacity. These people were major donors. They have the ability to support and give, but we had a shared love. We shared the love of CRMS, and we developed incredibly meaningful personal and professional relationships. And I can't think of a greater joy than asking one of those people who I just came to adore to say, I know you're in a position to support. Will you be as generous as you have been in the past? I'm not asking for me, I'm asking for those students and those unbelievable dedicated faculty members. And to get to that place in development, it changes development forever. So I think that's my best case study, is when EDs flip over to the other side and go, this is a joy and a gift to network and ask people to share this thing with me that we both love.
Nice. You know, that reminds me of this notion of building corporate culture, or this whole new movement called conscious capitalism, which is about something called the triple bottom line. And in the business world, it's taking care of your customer, your workforce, and taking care of the planet, like taking care of whatever your supply chain is impacting. And there's a big movement around development of B corporations like Patagonia, who have brought a lot of intention to this, that, hey, you know, if you care about your environment, if you care about your customers, and if you infuse the workplace with like this purpose-driven work, then it changes the game for everybody. And people want to be involved in that. People will take salary cuts to be involved with an organization that buys into this ethos. Can you speak to that in the nonprofit world? Because in many ways, it feels like that mature nonprofit and just nonprofit space in general has the edge on that. Because, you know,
they absolutely inherently have the thing that philanthropic people are hungering for. They want to help affect change. And so you're absolutely right. Just by the sheer nature of being a nonprofit, you've already kind of won the triple threat of you're working in a capacity to make the world a better place. And you need to recognize, you know, the great irony is you then need to bring the CEO mindset, you know, that you're so familiar with in the private sector, is, okay, we've got everything going for us. I need to get out into the world with intention and purpose and find people that care about this space and are philanthropic. And there are so many, this valley is so blessed with so many philanthropic people. And to really have beautiful conversations and go, hey, do you care about what we're doing? Because if you do, we would love to invite you to join us. And to find energy and passion and contagiousness in those conversations. You know, we used to go out on asks for CRMS, knowing that who we were talking to, we'd done our groundwork, we'd had our discovery conversations. It was an appropriate time to ask, but we asked with enthusiasm and passion and contagion. And people want to be part of something like that. That's why people give. They want to invest in really passionate people that are making a difference. And that's what you've got to embody, and you've got to confidently ask. And I promise my clients all the time, it's magic.
Yeah. You know, I think one thing I've loved about these conversations is how a lot of the conversations have been around external relationships. Like, how do we build the relationships to move the organization forward? But I think I don't want to be remiss to leave out, like, what is happening internally to support this? And maybe we could actually take a step back to that very first company, and just where that ED and that small team are wearing multiple hats to do multiple jobs, to the intermediate company where you've got people who have defined roles, but maybe some of those people have to take on new hats to sort of grow the organization, to that mature nonprofit where I would assume everybody has their silo, and part of the success of that mature nonprofit is that you're doing your very specific scope of work to drive the organization. But can you take a step back and really talk about operations required to drive this engine, and maybe even reference some of your CRMS days to sort of fill in that hole?
Yeah, I mean, there's that old adage that development is a team sport. And what that means is if everybody understands within the organization how critical and important the funding is, and they understand the composition of the organization financially. I spend a lot of time with my clients going, all right, talk to me very, very casually about how are you constructed? How much does it take a year to run? What's your operating budget? What composition is from grants and individual donors? If you share the power of that language with every single team member and every board member, and the culture is, listen, no one has any trouble understanding the power of program. We're all like incredibly enthusiastic ambassadors in that space, and that's what we do, and that's what we're paid to do. But if everybody understands the fiscal composition and so thoughtfully in any setting can share it with someone else and say, oh my gosh, you need to come talk to Lisa if we're over at CRMS. Every year we set out to raise $750,000 to support all this amazing program. I know she would love to talk to you about joining in your support. If you can create an organization that has that kind of culture across everybody, all of a sudden development is a team sport, and that networking and contagion. And it's not, I think sometimes people think talking about money is like, dirty. And I'm like, no, you can't be a nonprofit without tremendous philanthropic support. You should be excited, celebrate it, and talk about it really confidently and matter-of-factly. It's not even personal at that point. So culturally, I think you really want to have a shift. My team at CRMS, we were super comfortable in our skin talking about our money, and we presented in front of the whole community often, in front of the faculty, in front of the parents. It's like, this is what we do, and this is why it's so amazing here. Without you guys, we can't do this. And it's not anything to shy away from. So I think that's my number one. EDs in particular need to get so fluent in this space and happy and comfortable and share it and ask everyone to join them in this space, because that immediately shifts the paradigm on how the nonprofit views fundraising.
So I know in the business world, we caution against confidence and feeling safe. But even if you're a market leader and you feel like you're in the sweet spot and you're moving, you're rocking and rolling and everything feels great, you need to be looking around the corner, because what's coming around the corner could dramatically change the trajectory of your organization. Is that true in nonprofit, or when you achieve that sweet spot, you try to stay in the sweet spot? Or?
I think I love hearing that, because I think in a nonprofit you're constantly paranoid by nature. I don't think any small agile nonprofit is ever kind of like, whoa, we made it. One of the greatest challenges of nonprofits, and I know it's the same in the business sector, but it doesn't feel the same, is, usually a nonprofit has an annual fund, right? Or an annual operating budget and campaign. And so this would be the time of year at CRMS, we would be so excited for about 24 hours before we reset our new fiscal July 1, and we're faced with a brand new goal and had to start all over. So I think the sheer nature of nonprofits, even when the going is good, I think there's a built-in, much more heightened sense of kind of financial fragility. But your point is really well taken. Like here's a very potential dangerous scenario for a nonprofit. Is if you have an annual campaign and you get a really disproportionately large gift one time, like let's say you're $1 million organization and you've got some fee component and you raise, I don't know, 500,000 each year. Well, if someone comes along and gives you 50,000 one year, and that's a large gift, you can't ever like just build that into your fund and go, oh yeah, so next year we'll get a new 50,000. And so I think if anything, large one-time gifts really have to be thoughtful, and you got to be very careful that you just don't put them into your operating goal for that year, because you're going to come up next year with a $50,000 hole that you're going to have to fill. So just those type of, big moments, I think we live with a pretty heightened sense of, okay, how are we going to make it work next year in the absence of that?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all your time. I've learned so much from these 3 webinar series, and I hope our community will benefit from it. But again, it's the tip of the iceberg. And I think I'm also hopeful that people will take advantage of your services and reach out to you for a deeper dive, because certainly this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to know. And maybe as we close this up, could you just give us a snapshot of what, if someone were to choose to engage you, what does that look like? What do you provide for them? And maybe talk a little bit about some of your other services.
Awesome. Well, first of all, such a huge amount of gratitude to you and Coventure. You guys have been so great, and I've loved all these conversations, and I just really appreciate this partnership. Yeah, I have a little bit of a different formula. Some consultants work in an hourly basis, and that just doesn't suit my personality or style. So I work with my clients on a monthly basis, 1 to 3 months, and I just roll up my sleeves and really understand their needs and wants. Obviously, I bring a huge development focus, and at the end of the day, I want to leave them much bolder and stronger financially than I found them. And I definitely bring that practice of let's understand the math and your science, and let's teach you the art, and let's marry those two. But I am super hands-on and really custom to each individual organization's needs. And I think if anything, I probably bring too much energy and pace. I'm really fast moving and really energetic, but I want to make sure I over deliver my value. And in a whole new world order, I know you and I are looking forward to putting on an academy, which is a different version of that, maybe working with 4 or 5 nonprofits simultaneously for a month in more of a curriculum setting. But I just love talking to people. I'm happy to talk to anyone, just pro bono, understand what they're up to, what they're looking for, what their challenges are, what their opportunities. And then, people recognize right away, either I'm a fit for their personality, or I'm not, and I'm okay with that, right? But I've had a lot of fun and a lot of success with the folks I've worked with.
Nice. Well, again, thanks so much for being our expert on this series. And again, if you want to contact Lisa, you can do so through Coventure. Our website is coventure.io. Or you can reach out to me directly at mike@coventure.io, and I'm happy to put you in touch with Lisa or any number of consultants that we have working in a variety of sectors. So again, I'm Mike Lowe, Executive Director of Coventure. Thanks for joining us on this series focused on nonprofits, how to launch, scale, and then also develop the mature nonprofit. We hope this has been useful, and we look forward to sharing our next series where we get back into business development and sharing some of the decision-making tools that we use in our incubator and accelerator program. But also, we're going to plan on shining a light on independent contractors. And what do you do if you're out there flying solo and you're trying to develop a business enterprise working for a number of different organizations? So stay tuned, and we'll look forward to sharing additional content as we make our way through COVID-19. Lisa, thanks again, and look forward to seeing you around.
Thank you.